Welcome, everyone, to this session that forms part of Renew's Green Rebuild Toolkit Beyond BAL project. My name's Anna, and I'm the Managing Editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes magazine. I begin our session this evening by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the respective lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We honour Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land and sea, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I also recognise that we have people tuned in from all over the country today from many different traditional lands. I'm speaking from Dja Dja Wurrung country in Victoria, and if you'd like to, I encourage you to share where you're joining from in the chat. Tonight's session focuses on innovative bushfire resilient design and is the second event in our Beyond BAL series, which is running each Monday night for 4 weeks. Subsequent sessions will focus on vegetation risk and earth-coupled resilient design. The Beyond BAL project has been generously funded by grants from Global Giving and the federal government's Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Grants program, and we thank them for their support. In the course of the webinar series, we'll be featuring 12 case studies developed as part of our ongoing work to support communities rebuilding after bushfire. The homes in our case studies have resilient design elements and building approaches that extend our understanding of best practice beyond the Bushfire Attack Level, or BAL, rating system, hence Beyond BAL. Tonight we'll be showcasing 3 bushfire resilient homes in detail and talking to those who designed them. There'll be a short presentation on each, followed by a discussion between our expert Nigel and the architect involved. They'll try to answer any questions you have about the case study, but we may not get to all of them. That's quite a short little section of the program. In the last half hour, however, we'll bring the full panel together to discuss the topic of innovative bushfire resilient homes more generally, and I'll be putting your questions to all the experts. During the session, you can put questions into Zoom's Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Don't put your questions into the chat. The chat box, however, you can use, the chat window rather, on the bottom right of the screen, you can use to make general comments or to contact our behind the scenes team with any technical problems. Before we dive in, I also want to take a moment to speak about Renew, the organisation behind the Beyond BAL project. Renew is a non-profit membership-based organisation that works to transform Australian homes for climate and energy resilience. We do this in numerous ways, including running free events like this one, as well as our flagship event, Sustainable House Day. We produce independent expert resources like the Green Rebuild Toolkit and the Getting Off Gas Toolkit. We inspire and educate through our 2 magazines, Renew and Sanctuary, and we advocate for a fair energy transition on behalf of Australian households. We do all of this with a very tiny team of hard-working staff on a shoestring budget. We've been around for over 40 years and intend to be around for the next 40. We know that times are tough, but we encourage you to make a donation if you found value in this event series. You can also consider joining Renew or taking out a subscription to one of our magazines. These are all meaningful ways that you can support us to enable change Australia-wide. Okay, let's get started. First up tonight, we have Simon Anderson from Anderson Architecture to present on his off-grid flame zone house in the Blue Mountains. Simon graduated in architecture in 1996 and formed his own practice in 2002. He focuses on contemporary sustainable architecture that is designed using passive house principles. He also has a deep understanding of bushfire-resistant design, supported by his role as a senior deputy captain in New South Wales's Rural Fire Service. Hello, Simon, and welcome, and over to you for your presentation.
Great, thank you very much. I'll launch right in. Right, hopefully everyone can see that. As mentioned, I have an office with about 8 people, and I'm also the second in charge of a bushfire brigade in the Blue Mountains. This is the block of land that we were fortunate enough to buy back in 2015. So this is actually where the house sits today, and this tree here is has been retained. I'll talk a bit about that later. But this was the first day that we saw the block before we'd actually bought it. Yeah, look, it was a long journey. That's for sure. Here is the site plan, or an aerial shot. The house is up here in the orange blob. The main road through the Megalong Valley is on the bottom of the screen. North up the page. So the predominant weather or wind direction is from the northwest, and that's where the fires are most likely to come from. So the asset protection zone was developed by a bushfire consultant, and they had they planned about 40 metres on the north side of the house and about 40 metres on the western side. Because the east is uphill, it's slightly reduced to 19 metres, and then to the south is flame zone, and that's a very short 15-metre asset protection zone. The darker green is the 15% tree canopy that we actually measured limbs and worked out which trees to retain and which to keep, alongside an ecologist and an arborist. And the outer trees, there's 30% of those trees in that outer 10 metres. In terms of access, you access the site from the western side up past some water tanks and a shed, and there's a turning circle for a fire truck up in this corner. There is a fire trail or a fire break around the eastern and southern side, and that's one form of defence to stop slow-moving fires. And then the house itself has gravel right the way around the curtilage, so that there's no plants there, and we can easily get to embers that build up there. But importantly, there's a second access, which is an escape route out through the neighbour's property. In case that's needed, we can go out that way. So in terms of static water supply, which is water that's dedicated to bushfire fighting, there is a tank down at the shed, which is dedicated. And there's some tanks under the deck, which are also dedicated, and a dam. There's two permanent fire hose reels that can be quickly deployed, one from a barbecue and one down at the shed. And they can be quickly deployed to put out spot fires. There's some other attachments next to the house where RFS hoses can be quickly attached if you are exiting the house after the fire front had gone through. But importantly, these signs over here, this is what the fireys are looking for. They're looking for that static water supply sign that says that you have water dedicated to firefighting. And then they're looking for this 65mm stores fitting so that they can hook up the fire truck quickly and protect your house and themselves. Here's the house under construction. So it's broken into two halves. There's a living room section and a bedroom on the other, two bedrooms and a bathroom, and in the middle is an entrance with the services such as the hot water and the batteries and so forth. It was built with a concrete filled wall system, so that's what this unusual propping is doing. This is shortly after the concrete was poured. This is a section through the wall. So we've got 110mm of concrete that's poured on site. The panel itself came with 2 layers of fibre cement and some insulation built into it. You prop them up and fill it with concrete. So it's inherently very bushfire proof just because it's made of concrete. Some might think that's an overreaction, but it was done for other reasons as well, thermal mass. And then I've added an extra layer of PIR insulation, some steel framing, and then this cladding. So the cladding itself is, it's a decking board that's not meant to be cladding. And because this was my own house, I experimented and put decking on the outside of the house. There is a product this company has just released that would give you a similar look. It's also flame zone rated, and it has 60% recycled content. So that's, and very cost effective. So I think it's a worthwhile option. There's a little section through the slab and the wall up here showing the build up. The slab edge is insulated with more of this PIR, but it really needs to be said that PIR has to be dealt with in a specific way, because it can, at over 300 degrees, start off-gassing hydrogen cyanide as it breaks down. So on this on this northern side, there's fibre cement, 6 mil fibre cement, with another type of insulation, which is pyrogel in here. And then on the flame zone side, it's actually protected by Inex 16 mil board. Here's the house at the lock-up stage. So the builder finished it to lock up, and you can even see the slab edge exposed here. It was pretty rough and ready, but I painted the outside just for a bit of extra water protection, and then added the insulation. So 2 years later, 2 years of my weekends later, it looked like this, with all the cladding done, the landscaping, the deck, the painting, the joinery, etc. So here's the house from that northern side on the left. You can see that gravel sparse planted perimeter. And then there's actually 2 water catchments that catch water in a dry creek bed and funnel it down to some water features on either side. On the right-hand side, you can see the smaller pond that attracts a lot of birds. And that's, this is looking through that service area where the batteries are in the cupboard below, and the heat pumps and the air conditioner. So on that southern side, the southern side has a very steep section of land that builds up to it, and that's why this side is particularly flame zone. On this side, it has a roof that is able to be unscrewed. These posts can be clipped off here, unscrewed, and then it's wound down, and it becomes the bushfire screen, the flame zone screen. It's protecting the BAL 40 windows behind. And it has to be said that, unfortunately, you can't do this anymore, because this was built under the previous Australian standard that allowed a non-combustible metal screen in front of BAL 40 windows to equal flame zone. But now, these days, it has to be a tested flame zone shutter. But I still think it's a worthwhile thing to think about, because those windows that you're putting into your home are very expensive, and why not have screens that slide out or fold down or roll over them to protect that valuable investment? Here's a shot of those roll down screens on the bedroom and the entry side. The screens are open in that picture on the left, and then they're closed on the one on the right. And then there's the pull-out screen that actually most of the time is used for Western sun protection. So every afternoon those screens are rolled out, and you can see that there's only a 2 mil aperture in the actual. This is an off-the-shelf product, but it's actually quite open from the inside. Lastly, I don't know if you've seen, but there's a new app out that's only been released in the last month from Resilience Building Council. I tested it out on this house, and yes, it got 5 out of 5 stars. It's well worth the 20 or so minutes to put all the information in, but it didn't get a perfect score. It lost points for not having gutter guard, and also having a couple of trees that could fall on the house. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. That's I love that house. We had that in Sanctuary a few years back when it was brand new, and it's just a really great example of a very compact, well-designed house, really, for its site. I'd now like to invite Nigel Bell to join us. Nigel. Hi, Nigel. Nigel's been working closely with Renew to select the Beyond BAL case studies. He brings a wealth of experience developed through 4 decades working as an architect in the fire-prone Blue Mountains, not far in the same area as Simon's house, and has been a sustainability leader in the bushfire resilience field for more than 2 decades. He represents the Australian Institute of Architects on 3 bushfire standards committees, and has just returned from California and West Coast Canada researching their wildfire building response. So very relevant research experience recently there. If you have any questions for Nigel or Simon about this house in particular, please put them in the Q&A box now. And I'll hand over to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Well, first of all, obviously, it's a lovely house in every level. Quite rightly, it's been winning awards and notice because you tick all the boxes very well, first in terms of good quality design, sustainability, and exemplary in the way you have analysed and responded to a very high bushfire risk. BAL flame zone, which is the highest category. That means you've got burning embers, which actually takes out 80 to 90% of all lost buildings. You've got extreme winds, so therefore you've got to hold the roof on and look very carefully at the construction in that regard. It's got heat, and that's the point that when it's flame zone, it's more than 40 kilowatts a square metre. That's 40 kilowatts straight at you. And if you think from home about a 2 kilowatt radiator, think how hot that gets. It just shows by the time it's more than 40, you can't possibly be remotely exposed as a human being to that kind of heat. And of course, lastly, in flame zone, you've also got flame actually licking around the building. So that's the point of flame zone. And your project has ticked all the boxes that we have looked at in terms of all of those criteria. So congratulations, a very nice project in every level. But can I ask you a few questions, perhaps? Sure. Okay, you've got different kinds of shutters. You mentioned in your talk quite helpfully about the change in the regulations. But why, for example, in some cases, did you have sliding shutters, and other facades, other elevations, you had the ones that tilt up and down? Just tell us a bit more about shutters and the how and why in the way you did it, please.
Look, they all responded to a different spot, I suppose. Look, the main issue with shutters we grapple with is trying to build them in, and so it's that generally that shutter box that's the issue, and it can become quite awkward. So in the case of the Western sunscreen, that was quite a thin profile, having those two operable panels. That allowed that to be fully slid away and quite easily deployed without any electronic means. The roof that folds down was definitely an architectural whim, I suppose you could say. It was an idea that I've grown up around boats, and I like pulleys and winches and so forth, and I thought, I'll give it a go. The builder didn't want to give it a go, I can tell you. And it ended up sliding off to another friend builder who built the frame and came up and welded it on and helped me set up the pulley system. And then I clad the rest of it. So there was definitely a fair bit of ingenuity that went through that. It's actually a lovely spot on the southern side of the house that's always in shade. And it has a lovely feel to it. So, look, I'm not sure how else we could have covered such a large expanse of glass easily. So that's why that particular option was given there. And then the other roller shutters. Well, look, they've proven to be a godsend. They actually we use them quite a lot. So other than bushfire, so again, that was not easy to build those in, and there was certainly some tense moments on site around that. But that's the life of an architect. Sometimes you've got to negotiate your way through these spots.
Yeah,
it's also the life of an architect to do your own experimentation on your own home.
Absolutely, and there was definitely a lot of that in this build, as I recall, Simon. A lot of testing out things that you might then talk to clients about.
This was the first flame zone house we've ever done, and the idea was that we would test it out on ourselves and see what worked, and then use that wisdom on clients' houses with some sort of confidence. So luckily most of the experiments worked.
No, I'm a big fan of things that do double duty or even triple duty, and the lift up fire shutters that also function as shading for the veranda is genius. I think I really like that. We've got a few questions coming in. Can I jump in, Nigel? Is that okay?
Yes, by all means.
Okay. People were wanting to know what the insulated concrete wall system was. Simon, what brand it was? I know you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, the unfortunately they don't make that particular system anymore with the insulation built in. And look, we'd used it a number of times before, that system on other houses. So again, I thought it was a great idea to use it on my own place. I wouldn't go as far as spruiking it because it actually didn't go so smoothly on my site. So I'm not sure I should be promoting it, put it that way.
So as a general material concept, it's good, but not that particular incarnation of.
Yeah, look, it's there was the idea of having that open corner on it, and that's done through. There's 5 tons of concrete sitting up there on 2 steel posts, and my father was actually the structural engineer for most of that, and then decided to retire just before the house was built, and said, "You'll have to find a new engineer, son." So it did. His vision did work. It stays there, but it is quite a feat of engineering, and you probably couldn't have done it as elegantly without that concrete system.
Yeah. Thank you. And also, there's a couple of questions about the cladding.
Yep.
Was it pre-charred wood like Japanese shosugi-ban or something different?
No, it's a type of magnesium oxide board, and what I used on it was a Q-Tech stain with black colouring in it, and just by chance putting it on. Each board went a slightly different colour and it absorbed slightly different amounts of and I have so many questions about, how could you use timber in a flame zone house? Well, it's not timber. It's actually got bits of timber in it, in that recycled content, but it's actually mostly magnesium oxide and a form of cement, I believe. It's highly guarded secret, whatever is in there.
Getting back to the concrete, the wall section, concrete wall section, how do you handle the vapor transfer through? Well, how do you have? I guess the question really is, how do you handle moisture management?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something I have dwelled on. We use a program called Ubicus. That's a German online program that will show you where the condensation will form. And in this particular case, even this really tough environment that gets down below zero, the condensation's always on the outside, which is where you want it to be, in that rain screen. And the wall itself, I mean, it's been up for many years now. There's been no issues with water inside the wall on the wall face, which is helped by the fact that it's actually got a heat recovery system and it's always air moving around. That's no doubt helpful, but there's no issue with moisture.
So you did model that and make sure that you were confident that it was going to not be a problem. That sounds
yep.
Good. Do you want to hand back to you, Nigel, if you've got another question or two for Simon?
One of my questions of interest is that you've got reverse cycle air conditioning, presumably primarily for cooling, but you also have hydronic in-slab heating. What are you using as the energy source for the hydronics? And just tell us a bit more about the two systems, how and when you do or don't use them.
So there's a domestic heat pump that heats domestic hot water, and that water goes into a 300 or so litre tank. That's and then there's a loop inside there that can go off and do the floor heating. So again, that was a bit of an experiment, and the first night I wasn't there. My wife and kids were, and they just had everything on, and funny enough, the whole house ran out of power. So what we've learned is that you can really only run the floor heating when the sun's out in the middle of winter during the day. So you can actually switch it on via your phone, and if you're not there. And if it's a cold but sunny day, there's enough energy in the system to run it until the sun drops down, and then that takes many hours for the heat to come through. So by the time the colder weather comes through at night, it's lovely in there. It's a really lovely form of heat.
It's using the thermal mass of the concrete. Because it's warm, you're keeping it warm. You've got insulation all the way around.
Yep.
So the warmth through the day helps moderate the temperature through the night.
That's right. But there's also passive solar principles in there. There's a lot of it's a long house facing north, and then there's actually honeycomb blinds that automatically drop down at sunset and keep that heat in.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
So we're going to have to move on, I'm afraid, even though we can probably talk about this house for another half an hour. Thank you very much, Simon. I'm going to move on to the second case study now. So next we have Sarah Moir, who is of H&H Architects. She's going to present on their Lowlands residence in southern WA. Sarah is a senior architect and associate with H&H Architects, which is the largest regional architectural practice in WA. They have 3 offices in Albany, Kinjarling, Bunbury, Koombana, and Kalgoorlie, Kalkurla. Sarah has successfully designed, managed and delivered various residential, commercial, educational, hospitality, health, community and tourism developments, so she's all over the shop. She has a passion for site-specific environmentally considered design, community engagement and interior design across projects of diverse scale and nature. And this house is actually a retrofit renovation project, which is exciting to hear about what you can do in a high fire risk zone. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much for having me. As Annie mentioned, this site is on the very west coast of Western Australia. It's in Lowland. The client came to us with an existing little beach shack on a 12-hectare site right on the coastline there. It was a very rustic holiday home with a lot of character, and as you can see, a considerable amount of vegetation surrounding the site. So bushfire design was always going to be a major part of the design outcome. The vegetation around the site was classed as forest because it was surrounded by dense peppermint trees, low shrubs and lots of lattifules on a 7-degree slope. It was originally classed as a BAL FZ site, but the client was able to do some clearing around the house to create an asset protection zone of about 27 metres, which meant it could drop down to that BAL 40 rating. So that's the site there in orange. You can see it's obviously very much so on the coast and all of that surrounding vegetation around it. Bushfire resilient design was really important to this client. They were from a farming background and very much understood the risks of bushfire in a rural area. Also, this particular site in Lowlands, there's only one road in, so they really wanted to do everything that they could to create the most resilient renovation to their property. They really also wanted to keep the essence of the beach shack and this little surf shack that they'd been staying in for a little while. And as you can see, it's very much not bushfire compliant. When they originally came to us, there was gaps everywhere. It's got a completely unenclosed subfloor, open eaves, and yeah, as I said, sitting on top of that hill, surrounded by dense vegetation. They were open to ideas and focused on wanting a functional, durable and practical outcome, and not so much focused on the architectural aesthetic of it. They were quite happy to have an agricultural sort of shed style look, which is obviously conducive to some of the BAL materials that we could have used. And they also wanted to use a lot of recycled materials from the property and from their farming property as well, to try and sort of bring a bit of character to it. And also because it's a holiday home, they wanted it to be a lock and leave setup as well. So you can see we've got the existing floor plan on the left. It's quite small and simple, and then the outcome that we worked on was to try and create this BAL 40 rated shell that envelops the building with verandas on most of the sides, and This meant that they could keep that character of the little shack in the middle, but have this durable and bushfire protected shell around the footprint of the building. We used shutters along the veranda to create that BAL 40 compliant shell, and also added new cladding, new roofing and shutters over the windows as well. And so this outcome ticked the boxes for the client in terms of achieving a bushfire resilient design for a renovation, maintaining the feel of the little beach shack. It was a sustainable outcome because we retained as much as we could of the existing, and it became a lock and leave property with low maintenance materials and things that they could not have to worry about for a long length of time. This is a before and after photo just showing you how we were able to keep most of the form of the building but really upgrade the entire exterior of it to be more bushfire resilient. It's got new roofing, new cladding, the enclosed subfloor. We infilled all those gaps. It's insulated, and we've got the benefit of open verandas, which can be operable. So you can see here that this is the other side of the building. You can really sit on those verandas at the front or the back, depending on the climate and however the environment is, depending on the time of year and the time of day. And you can see some of those non-combustible cladding options that we've used there as well. And it really, as I said, it was quite an agricultural sort of style aesthetic, which works quite well in a rural area, and they were happy with the low maintenance factor of those materials as well. The BAL 40 shutters, I would say, are the main feature of the house. So when they're open, it looks quite normal, and when it's closed, it's really shut down in that lock and leave sort of look, and obviously protects them to BAL 40 standard as well. So they're perforated, heavy-duty extruded aluminium. They're electric remote control operated with a manual override system. And not only does it obviously achieve BAL 40, but they also give that climate control and insect protection and shade and all that sort of thing as well. So they're quite functional in that regard. Detailing for those was a little bit of a challenge. I think similarly as Simon was saying, just the bulk of the head of the shutters sitting under the eave there is quite chunky, so we sort of did our best to sort of hide it as best as we could, and trying to just create sort of a neat design outcome for those shutters. So some of the other features that we had that were, I guess, innovative in terms of bushfire design, the bushfire shutters around the verandas. We had Harvey deck flooring to most of the outdoor veranda spaces as well. The colour-bond cladding and roofing was gap sealed throughout with cavity closers, flashings and all our detailing to comply with AS 3959. We had BAL 40 subfloor vents, and another unusual thing that I hadn't come across before was that we also had to make the compostable toilet BAL compliant as well. So that photo on the top right is the BAL 40 rated combustible toilet enclosure, which is first in my architectural career, but something unusual and something interesting to think about because that system had to sit outside of the building footprint, so it also had to comply with the rest of the building shell as well. So that was something that was relatively unique to this project. Yeah, so as you can see, that's it was a successful outcome for the client. So we're looking for an innovative and functional response to bushfire resilient design in a relatively high-risk rural location in WA. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that really is very innovative. I particularly love the way that you pushed the bushfire boundary, if you like, of the house out to the edge of the veranda with those shutters. Again, ticking my boxes of things doing double duty because they also obviously act as shading too when the house is being used, and security when the house isn't occupied. And as you said, it enabled you to not worry about making the original exterior of the house on the inside of the veranda BAL 40 rated. So that's very clever. Nigel, I'm stealing your thunder. I'll hand over to you to talk about the project.
Yes, hello there again. Well done, Sarah. Very nice, elegant project, very rural, utilising the existing form, and certainly in our earlier discussions, more than you just have, it was the discussion about the extensive reuse of materials from the old building into the new. Windows, which weren't BAL 40 compliant, well, they were moved inboard behind the shutters. So again, it made it legitimate that you could still get the BAL 40 tick. Yes, it's so nice to see a project that responds to those kind of matters as distinct from the no-brainer knock down, rebuild, which unfortunately is not a very sustainable option in most cases. So you tick all the boxes there. So well done. So if I can just ask a few questions. Firstly, working in remote areas, rural, regional, has its own challenges. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that, because you don't have access necessarily to a range of builders. You may or may not have the range of materials. What about approval? What about the understanding of bushfire resilience? Could you tell us a bit about how you've felt that and how you've dealt with them?
I'd say cost is probably one of the big challenges. Obviously, just being further away from a major city, everything's going to cost a little bit more. So that's one factor to consider. And particularly with this project, even the bushfire shutters had to come from Perth, and they had to be installed by the supplier as well. So that was just another cost specific to this project. Yes, there's always going to be some limitations with regards to materials and trade availability and builders and that sort of thing. So we definitely tend to try and sort of work with the same builders a lot of the time, because we know what their skills are and that side of things. I guess rural regional WA is very vast, so you're always dealing with different sites, a lot of varied topography and very vegetation, different environmental conditions, that side of things. So you're always going to be designing for something that's very site specific, and particularly when that comes to bushfire. Over 90% of WA is designated as in a bushfire-prone area, so a lot of residential work that we do does have a BAL rating. So there's always challenges in achieving compliant BAL outcomes, whether it's because of the client's budget or their brief or whatever it may be. Again, not wanting to necessarily have that bushfire aesthetic if you've got to have a house covered in shutters. Luckily, this client was quite interested in that, and they liked that sort of agricultural aesthetic, but not everyone. That's not going to be for everyone. So, there's different costs involved in whether you've got shutters over regular windows or expensive BAL rated windows or whatever it may be. In terms of the approvals, in terms of planning and council approvals and things, I don't imagine there'd be too many differences. We've still got to comply with the same sort of things. But we do have to fully comply with AS 3959 in WA, and there's no alternative solutions or performance solutions or anything like that. So it is all sort of strictly to the standard. So we've always got those challenges to face as well.
And
just on the question of the shutters, Sarah, one audience member would like to know, are the shutters also Mozzie proof? Because that would be brilliant if they are.
They would be when they're fully closed, I guess. They are perforated, so as they're closing, you can see filtered light through them. But then when they're fully closed, it's really quite dark in there. So I would say, yeah, it would comply with the minimum gaps
as well.
Yeah.
And what is perforated aluminium still allowed? I guess this question probably comes off the back of Simon saying that talking about his shutter solution not being compliant in the same way that it was when that house was built. But I realise this is a more recent project. But are those aluminium shutters, heat resistant enough? Obviously, because aluminium does have a relatively low melting point compared with other metals.
I couldn't tell you. This house was finished 5 or 6 years ago and was very much compliant at the time. Yeah. So I'm not sure if the exact same model would still be compliant. I believe that that there are obviously BAL shutters BL40 shutters out there. But yeah, not sure if the exact ones are still available that this house used.
Yeah, so
Perhaps if I can answer that.
concept is the design concept still applies, maybe just not
Sure.
whether or
But can I answer that, Anna? Because yes, aluminium, the low melting point means that in an intense bushfire, it was accepted 5, 6, 7 years ago that they would fail. And the question was how quickly, and would it then protect what was behind.
Okay.
Essentially, no longer aluminium accepted in that way, but different states deal with it, unfortunately, differently. Certainly New South Wales, Victoria, and the like, the stainless steel shutters, the roll-down stainless steel shutters are approved. They're the ones because stainless steel has a far higher melting point than aluminium, but of course they cost more again.
Yeah.
But picking up also on what Simon had to say, it's the head box that sits up above the window. So in many cases, I think you'll see it. No, you won't. It's another project I was thinking of. In many cases, you can try and hide it in the eave, and that costs more than Sarah and her client wanted to pay, because your project, Sarah, was very cost effective. But otherwise, there are a number of brands that make stainless steel mesh, very, very fine mesh, coated, and they fold up into a very small head box. And they work. The only thing is they don't have double duty or triple duty, as you referred to, in that they don't do anything for security, and you wouldn't want to leave them down, in week after week, year after year in summer sun. So the ones that are the finest, the smallest roller shutters only come down if there's a fire or a fire imminent.
I see.
Yep.
Lots of trade-offs.
Yeah, always. There's no perfect solution.
No.
Sarah's project has shown some good indicators of different ways of treating these matters. So that's the important point to make.
And Sarah, Wendy would like to know, how did the design achieve light or solar access and light deep into the house, given the deep verandas and the shutters? I mean, obviously you don't have to have the shutters closed, but.
Yeah, I guess when we were talking with the energy consultant, we looked at it on the basis that the shutters would be up most of the time, because they're, ideally meant to just be used in the event of bushfire, or if they were leaving the property and they weren't there because it's a holiday home. So most of the time they are open, and it's just, like a standard depth of a veranda with the windows are fairly well shaded. But they would generally be open when the owners are home.
And so then that's just the depth of, I presume you modelled the depth of the veranda for suitable solar access.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, can I say that up to BAL 40, roof windows are permissible in terms of, one particular brand, Velux, that have been tested and approved, as long as you have a bespoke made flashing to go with it. So that's typically what I personally do to get light deep inside. And of course, you have to make sure they're closed at the crucial time, like all windows, if there's ever a bushfire threatening. But that's another way of dealing with it. But of course, as all these things, they are energy efficient, sustainable. But again, there's a cost element that comes into play, and what the client needs and wants.
Absolutely. Did you have another question? One more quick question for Sarah, Nigel?
There are the key ones. We already touched upon the use of recycling and reusing. Is there anything in particular that you see as different? Because most of the bushfire regulations and discussion are the eastern and southern states. As an outlier of huge dimensions, Western Australia, how do you see that?
We definitely have a lot of bushfires over here. I would say that, perhaps it's the density over east that the effect might be greater in terms of a lot of different communities and towns may be affected by one bushfire, whereas perhaps in WA it's really only one small town that might get affected just because of the vastness of it. I presume it would also be the vegetation type and terrain differences as well. WA is relatively flat. So just in terms of, the speed of bushfire and being able to fight it and access and that sort of thing. A lot of sites would have multiple access points. This one obviously was right on the sort of coastline, so it only had one way in. That sort of things. But yeah, I would say a lot of it would probably just be due to density and size of those towns over there in comparison. But yeah.
Okay. And in some areas, you've got fantastic forest resources in limited areas, and then huge other areas, there's a lot of brick and block construction, as I understand it, which inherently is going to be more bushfire resistant compared to timber.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Once again, and we could talk about that for another half an hour, no problem, but we need to move on. We come now to our last case study with Ingrid from Ingrid Donald Architects, presenting on the Lookout House. Ingrid's based in the Blue Mountains. She's been designing and delivering innovative and sustainable residential and public buildings in highly bushfire-prone areas for 15 years. Before this, she was a practice director in Melbourne for 10 years. Her work is grounded in how people experience their environment. We'll hear about the Lookout House via a short video presentation, and then we'll have a chat with Ingrid and Nigel.
The Blue Mountains is one of the most beautiful, rugged and bushfire-prone places in Australia. The clients James and Kate purchased a site on a ridgeline above the National Park.
We've always loved the Blue Mountains and we've always come up here with our family. This particular block seemed to be perfect for us. It's really close to some great walks. It's easy to get to from Sydney and we can get here by train. But when we're here, we really feel like we're in the bush. What we really wanted from the design was a house that would allow us to enjoy the view and still get plenty of light. Even though on the north side we have what can sometimes be a fairly busy road.
This presented extraordinary opportunities to design a house that was connected to the landscape, sustainable, practical and also bushfire resilient. We chose a simple design facing north for passive solar gain with a separate garage. This approach means that only the house needed to meet flame zone requirements, but the garage could simply be made of non-combustible materials which reduced costs. The house has a clear 10-metre defendable zone around it, and the water tanks are visible from the road, which makes it easier for fire crews to access. We created aesthetic variations in the facade by carving space out of the recycled brick volume and using Inex flame zone rated boards in those indented spaces, which provides a visual contrast to the brick. 3 covered porches connect the structure to the surrounding landscape. These allow occupants to exit from 3 different sides in the event of a fire.
One of the key elements of the brief to Ingrid was that we wanted the house to really make the most of the views, but at the same time offering us privacy from the road.
We opted for a continuous series of high windows on the road side of the building, and on the south side we chose larger windows to connect the house to the landscape and maximise the views. The operable high windows also promote cross-ventilation in the hotter months. The clients wanted to avoid shutters, so par-hammer windows became the preferred option.
Par-hammer windows, because they are certified bushfire flame zone windows, allow architects and designers to freely design a house that fits into the bush and still provide safety and comfort to its occupants. The benefit of our flame zone windows is it doesn't require shutters or screens or sprinklers. It gives the comfort to the client that if they're not at home, they don't need to worry about activating any of these other products.
They also add to a house's sustainability in terms of its energy efficiency and allow the occupants to connect with the landscape around them. This fits with my design approach of houses that are sustainable, beautiful, embedded in their landscape and bushfire resilient.
The Blue Mountain has a very challenging climate with extremes from 45 degrees plus in summer to snow in winter. Our windows with a very low U value provides the ideal solution. Our windows opens up what's possible when designing flame-front rated homes.
What I love most about this house is the strength of its volume, the connection to the landscape, and all the design features and flame zone materials hiding in plain sight.
Well, the result has been just perfect for us. When we're here, we really feel like we're in amongst the trees. We don't see road or neighbours in any direction out of any window, really. We get tons of light from the north. It's fantastic.
What a terrific, simple, satisfying design for that particular site, Ingrid. I'll hand over to Nigel to say a few words, but before I do that, I'll just ask people to put any questions that they have for Ingrid about this particular house in the Q&A box now. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Anna, and well done, Ingrid. A very elegant, simple project, rectangular in form, simple roof to make sure you didn't have re-entrant corners where a canopy fire might catch things alight. Obviously, it's entirely non-combustible externally, as is required in those high and extreme BAL flame zone areas. And interestingly, the fact you've got the clearance, the asset protection zone around the house and almost going up to the street boundary, which is very, very close. So was it actually frustrating to yourself or your client when they bought a ginormous lot of bushland and yet the full range of fire regulations combined with often opposing bushfire regulations meant you had to build close to the road? Could you tell us a bit about that journey?
Yeah, so this site is about 6 hectares, so it's quite large. Most of the site, about 87% of the site, is zoned as conservation area. So that means we were left with 13% of the site. Of that 13%, almost half of that was either vegetation constraint or slope constraint. So we're left with, although we started with 6 hectares, we probably ended up with quite a small envelope that we were able to build in. And added to that, even within the Blue Mountains, we have a lot of flora and fauna restrictions. So the development area was actually restricted to 750 square metres. And we also had a 15-metre setback from the road, which needed to be included in the asset protection zone. So we really had a lot of constraints, which meant we ended up with a very small footprint.
Yeah.
And also, I guess the clients wanted to take advantage of the view, which was a little bit away from the road. So there was a lot of back and forward with council saying, can we move it a little bit further that way? No, you'll move it further this way. And there was a lot of back and forward, but that's part of the process.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Yes, so often there is that distinct contradiction between the bushfire suggestion, which is to reduce fuel close to the building, trees, vegetation, which you have done, as distinct from environmental ecology people who really want to retain every single tree. And that's the kind of discussion we'll have in the fourth of these 4 Beyond BAL discussions. So that'll be an interesting one to follow through for people who are listening and have that as an issue.
Mm.
So in Xboard, would you like to say a little bit more about what it is and why you've used that in terms of the composition and its fire resistance?
Yep. So Xboard is a 16 millimetre thick manganese oxide board with some recycled content of timber elements in there as well, which sort of goes against what we all think, that we should have no timber in flame zone. It's I guess it's a product that has been tested by the manufacturers without requiring further fire rating behind it. So it's I find it a very cost-effective material in that you're just cladding the building once. You don't need to fire rate again behind it. So it's very cost-effective in that sense. And it also has, I guess, sort of a cement colour, which in Simon's presentation, he said that he added a stain to the outside. The board has a lot of variation across the surface, so you do get a nice sort of colour patina across the board if you just clear seal it as well. Yeah.
The main part of the house looks to be double brick, Ingrid, and one person would like to know, is there insulation in the brick cavity?
There is insulation in the brick cavity, and it's double brick just on the two short sides. Again, that was about managing the costs for the project. I think the owner would have liked a lot more double brick, but it's expensive to get bricklayers.
And how did you go with Par Hammer in terms of cost? Because they're wonderful windows and doors. Obviously, they are the only timber windows that have been tested and are fully approved for flame zone. Interestingly, to my mind, the windows have been approved, but they've run into problems with the doors. Have you struck that? Were you using Par Hammer doors or not?
Well, I better do some more research. I have been using the doors in flame zone.
Well, it's the glazed doors I'm talking about.
Yep. Well, that project has 2 glazed doors and a solid timber door, so I better look into that. But with this project, as we said in the video, the client really had an aversion to shutters, so we went down the Par Hammer route, as you said, one of the only options if you don't have shutters. The other option is a steel window, but that's not very good in terms of thermal conductivity. So we went down the Par Hammer route, and we basically juggled the budget in order to just put the windows where we absolutely needed them for the view and minimise them in other places.
Yep.
And I did look at some cost comparisons over a number of projects of shutters and with thermally broken windows behind them versus just the Par Hammer windows. And it seemed to be somewhere, the shutter with the BAL 40 window behind it tended to be about between 60 and 70% of the cost of the Par Hammer windows.
Okay, so it's not a huge cost premium to go the Par Hammer windows. BAL F7 windows on there. And
in flame zone, I guess a lot of people don't understand that the shutters are actually tested with a particular window behind them, and more often than not, it is a BAL 40 window, which is a slightly more expensive window. So I think people get mixed up with that, how cheap a window can I put behind it, but in actual fact, they're not tested that way.
Actually, you need to put a reasonably expensive window behind it anyway.
Especially in the Blue Mountains where we really good performing windows.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously high performing windows from a bushfire point of view are also very likely to be high performing from a thermal point of view as well, which it has so more benefits than just from a bushfire resilience point of view.
Oh, certainly. I mean, in all bushfire zones, toughened glass is required on the outside pane, or the only pane if it's a single glazed window or door. But certainly one of the difficulties that I'm sure you've experienced, Ingrid, is the certainty, or sometimes the lack of certainty, as to what will be actually approved by certifiers, because they are the ones that will say, well, we'll accept this and not accept that. And what I was alluding to before, New South Wales RFS in their documentation saying, we will accept flame windows that will flame temporarily. All timbers will flame initially, and then good timbers, such as Par Hammer, self-extinguish. But New South Wales RFS has not carried that through to doors. So it remains very unclear, and largely who is signing off the certification, whether they will or will not accept glazed Par Hammer doors on different projects. So, one of the ongoing uncertainties.
I've also had that issue with UPVC windows behind flame zone shutters where they sort of say, okay, we've got certification, but then you go to the certifier and they say, but they're BAL 29 windows. And then you go back to the window company and they say, well, I'll put steel reinforcement in it. And so it's just this ongoing, as you say, approval from the certifier is what actually you need at the end of the day.
Yes, unfortunately.
David has on that point. David has asked, how would the pile hammer windows in this house, Ingrid, survive a fire? Would they get damaged to a degree where they'd all need replacing? And that's
actually
different between, to a certain extent. My understanding is, to a certain extent, shutters and windows are sort of supposed to be sacrificial to prevent the fire and the embers and the flames getting into the house.
Yeah. My understanding is that the seals, correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, that the seals are intumescent and so they expand when the flame gets close enough. The thing that they do, I guess, is stop the heat transfer to the inside, so everything inside doesn't burn, which is a good thing. But certainly if the fire was in direct contact, you'd probably need significant repairs to those windows. But I believe that's the same for shutters and windows behind them anyway, depending on the intensity and duration of the fire front.
I'm just going to quickly interrupt to say we're about to get into the whole panel Q&A session. So if people would like to start putting their questions for the panel more on bushfire resilient, innovative bushfire resilient design more generally into the Q&A box, now's the time to do it, and we'll wrap up with Ingrid pretty soon. But just start your questions coming now. So go on, Nigel.
I think I lost the thread of what I was going to say.
We were talking about windows being damaged if they were actually in a fire, but protecting the house in the process.
So many external cladding lining materials will suffer. They will deteriorate if you've got insurance, and that's the big if, and that's an increasingly important issue, that they will replace it. One of the interesting technical details that I've been told is that if flame and fire comes up to the building, the insurance will cover it. One of the interesting things is that a few manufacturers have used glass, which is intumescent glass, and that is they have conventional glass, but then they have the plastic interlayer, as in all safety glass of that kind, but at certain temperatures, it goes from being transparent and almost not there. It foams, it thickens, and it stops the fire coming through. But the flame may not actually have hit the house. It's just the temperature nearby, and it's been pointed out to me that could have an impact on your insurance cover. Because again, fine wording of insurance cover. If there's no flame and fire immediately at the house, they may void the insurance contract, some companies. So again, always the fine print, but certainly I can tell you one of the big developing issues behind the scenes is when will the cost of insurance absolutely take off for fire compared to the much bigger claims for flood, typhoon, cyclones, those sorts of things. It's happening, but one day, after next mega fire perhaps, then there will be just too costly for too many people, in my belief. Big problem.
Yeah. There are lots more questions for you in the Q&A about this particular house, Ingrid. So we're going to need to move on to the panel session, but perhaps if you want to try and do two things at once, you can maybe jump in and answer some of those questions in there. Thank you very much for sharing that insight into that project. I'm going to ask Sarah and Simon to jump back in now. And hi, everyone. And so we'll just have a bit of a Q&A about innovative bushfire resilient design in general. And maybe, Nigel, just to kick us off, this is quite late in the piece, but for this session, but if you could provide a basic explanation of what the BAL rating actually is in this context.
Bushfire Attack Level. From 2009 version of Australian Standard 3959, it is issue of the radiant heat, the kilowatts per square metre. And for example, BAL 29 is 29 kilowatts of heat per square metre. BAL 40 kilowatts of heat per square metre, and flame zone is above that again. So that's the point. It's the starting point from which all the bushfire considerations can apply. And you also need to be careful on websites, just as Ingrid pointed out a few moments ago, about different advice that you can get, is that there are quite a few products and even some manufacturers who make vague claims about, yes, we meet this or that bushfire standard. But as we've just been talking about, you need to say, give me the written evidence that it can and does meet whatever your BAL rating is. But certainly up to BAL 29, most project homes, most everyday houses, you can deal with BAL 29 with just a few tweaks, perhaps here and there, about which timber you use or filling in a few gaps and cracks. But here tonight and the series, we're talking about BAL 40 or flame zone, which is where you jump up a quantum leap in requirements, difficulty, and unfortunately cost. Although I must say these projects are all relatively affordable compared to many others that we've had to look at for this series. So, congratulations to you all, each in your own way, on that matter too.
It was one criteria for the selection of the case studies for the Beyond BAL series too, was at least a reasonable level of affordability, which is always a tricky word to use, but not crazy expensive houses.
Indeed, yes. There were some beautiful ones we had to reject on that very basis.
Yeah. David's asking, Nigel, do you believe that house insurance companies will eventually stop insuring houses in bushfire-prone areas?
Well, can I say a client of mine in a high bushfire area got a letter from their insurance company out of the blue just saying, we assess you as BAL 69. Now, there's no such number. It's basically meant flame zone. And it didn't tell them anything other than giving them a warning. And of course, that got them worried. They came to me because they did want to upgrade their house, and we've done that. And that was featured in one of your Sanctuary magazines of a year and a half ago, Anna. Yep. But the point is that increasingly using LiDAR, which is sort of satellite imagery, looking at topography, looking at vegetation, they are able to produce what is known as BAL contours. Basically, they can map and they can say this band is flame zone. A bit further away, this band is BAL 40. This band is BAL 29. So the technical knowledge is there and the ability in advance to have a pretty good go at what your BAL rating might be. But that information is not publicly that available, but certainly insurance companies have it. And the certifiers and the bushfire BPAD practitioners, the people who specialise in bushfire advice, they have paid access to look at that as part of their response to giving all of us practitioners reliable figures that what BAL rating we need to address.
So in the app that I was talking to you about, that was presented at the recent bushfire conference in the Blue Mountains, and it was touted as a form of reducing your home insurance. There was a carrot involved that if you got a higher number, that you could potentially reduce your insurance. So I think that's a really good initiative to make people, and it was quite good that it gives you a list of to-do things, that you can work on to do that.
Yes, I totally agree. People should follow through on that one, Simon. Couldn't agree with you more.
From a question for you, designers and architects, what are the what are your favourite innovation tricks for designing in high BAL areas that you have up your sleeve, that, in terms of materials or design approaches? What are your favourites?
I've probably designed 10 or more flame zone houses now, and I think typically you don't get someone coming to you with endless budget, and obviously flame zone does add, I guess we've been touting for a number of years that it's 20 to 30% of the costs it adds. So I've been using a lot of brick because it doesn't need to be fire rated, and a lot of the Inex board which did go out of production for a little bit. And as Simon said, the decking boards are out of production, but the panel boards that are sort of 3 metres by 1.2 metres are certainly still in production, and they seem to be a pretty cost-effective approach. And I like the recycled bricks because they have the sustainability factor to them as well.
Absolutely. How about you, Sarah? What are your favourite tools for innovation in this space?
This BAL 40 house obviously had the shutters, which was an interesting way to achieve that outcome. And we've also done a BAL FZ house with par-hole windows as well. And that particular house they wanted the aesthetic to be like a Queenslander, so very much not really conducive with standard BAL sort of standard materials. So I think that was the most interesting challenge, I guess, in trying to have windows that didn't look unusual and looked like timber, and trying to use fibre cement weatherboard cladding and things like that. So trying to use materials that don't look like they're non-combustible, but they actually are.
Yeah, for sure. And Simon, what are your favourites?
We definitely. It's a one way of saying to clients, well, maybe you don't need to have such big windows because that's an expensive part. And then work with the landscape and the bushfire consultant and the ecologist. There's this dance that you do to try and get your one aspect or whatever that's the key to the house to make it work. And
it's a big window with a view or whatever it is.
Yeah, and then I think the other go-to thing is the roller shutters that actually have a small amount of insulation inside and do trap an air layer. They're really good at keeping the heat in wintertime, and being shutters and then keeping the house cool as well in summer. So I do think the testing that I've done anyway has the shutter, the window itself, and then the honeycomb blinds behind is a really powerful thermal break compared to a wall that's obviously much better.
Yeah, I've had a lot of clients surprised about how much they use the shutters in summer for cooling. Just got to remember to shut the windows first.
Indeed. Have any of you ever used intumescent paint as protection for timber cladding, window frames, that kind of thing? Speaking of innovative products.
Yes.
You have, Nigel?
So it's not recognised as acceptable under the NCC purely because it depends completely on the maintenance. And I've been after this product development for the 20 or 30 years. And as I understand it, whilst they can pressure impregnate horrible chemicals to make, pine last longer, pressure impregnating the chemicals needed for intumescent, which stops the fire, also reduces the durability. It doesn't last, and the timber doesn't last as long as it otherwise would naturally. So no, it's not really an answer. By all means, people can add it, but you won't get any regulatory assistance or in that way.
So not a silver bullet.
Well, again, it's one of the few things you can do when you're retrofitting. Three of us and the four of us here live and work partially in the Blue Mountains and the conservation hut 30 odd years ago. That's all we could use 30 or 40 years ago, but no longer. One question or comment I was going to ask when talking about innovation, all three projects that we've looked at this evening are rural. They're not involved, no contact with the sewer. So three projects, each have used a different system of effluent disposal, which is highly a big sustainability question once you're not part of the sewer. Because, Simon, you've got a worm farm. Sarah's one has composting toilet, a multi-run from Sweden initially. And Ingrid, you've got a AWTS, I understand, advanced wastewater treatment system, which takes power and deals with the effluent and then puts it into an underground trench. So Sarah, you mentioned you had to put a box around the plastic of your multi-room, but no problems with it working otherwise, no difficulties. You're happy with that system?
Yeah, as far as I know, they're very happy with it. They were very particular about researching particular products that they wanted to use. So they let us know early on that that's what they had in mind. So we were able to work out, was there enough clearance under the house, or it obviously had to sit outside. So just how we could actually make that work with what was there and to be bushfire compliant as well.
Because you had to have a direct drop from your toilet straight into the unit, don't you? So you end up designing a fair bit of the house around that drop.
Yeah, which is good to know early on and not, right at the end that they wanted to use something a little bit different. So, always good to find out any interesting design quirks earlier rather than later, I guess.
And Simon, tell us about worm farms.
Oh, it's great. I love them. There was no design issues with it. You could use whatever you like, whatever sort of toilet, just a standard toilet. And it's got a little lid that you can go and put your scraps or even meat into. And the other reason we used it was because it's an off-grid house. It has very low energy consumption. So it's basically worms, and there's a float switch inside that gets to a certain level and pumps it out to infiltration beds under the ground. What I would do if I did have my time again, it's also got a pump on the outside of the tank. In this case, Blue Mountains is notorious for having rock just under the surface, and they tried everywhere to find a spot for this tank, and they couldn't find a spot that didn't have rock. So they actually dug a hole partially into the rock, covered this 2x2 tank. And it's got a pump on the outside that if there's too much water, it will automatically pump water out, and the whole tank won't float. But off-grid in the middle of winter, lots of rainy weather, and you do start wondering, is it going to just pop one day? So I think in hindsight, I would have tried to get a way of a pipe out or a way of weighing it down, maybe I don't have that thing to worry about on a rainy winter's night.
One of our viewers has asked about sprinkler systems. I don't think any of you have mentioned sprinkler systems on any of these three houses. What role do you specify them for some projects? What role do they play in fire protection, and are they a cost-effective solution?
Look, I don't believe in them at all, unless you've got a massive dam or huge tanks. They can use great quantities of water. Generally, there's a good breeze or wind or high wind going when there's a fire around. And at the latest bushfire conference, they had someone who'd spent or did a whole PhD on multiple different sprayers in different directions and proved that it was highly ineffective and used a whole lot of water. So that's why my place, you can close it down and walk away and not have to worry about turning it on. Turning it on is another major issue that because you can use so much water and you don't really want to try and remotely turn them on either.
I think the other issue, I've seen them work and save houses, which is amazing, but I think, as Simon's saying, that's more the rarity that it's actually just worked in that particular case. I think the issue is that they're not included in the Australian standards for bushfire design, so therefore it doesn't come into account when you're trying to get a BAL flame zone house approved and certified. Certainly the certifier is not really interested whether you've got sprinklers or not, even if they were able to be designed properly. And perhaps this guy doing the Masters will be able to come up with a really good solution for us that will get included in the Australian standards in the future, but it's certainly not there at the moment.
And I
just wanted to go back to Nigel, I just looked up the absorption trenches that we used, and it was actually an AES absorption system which has no moving parts. It just has the primary septic tank which then goes into a network of pipes that have sand absorption within those trenches. And that was chosen because, as Simon said, the low soil profile of Blue Mountains means that you can't have a lot, in certain places you can't have like mound septic systems or something that require a deeper soil profile.
Yes, the site factors become crucial in what's permissible or not. Just getting back to sprinklers, there is an Australian standard on sprinklers, which is effectively useless. I wasted my time being part of that 10 or 12 years ago. And I spoke at the Royal Commission 2020 saying it's one of the few things that can be effective in existing, otherwise impossible building situations. They do save buildings, but in terms of regulation, they are extremely difficult because there are so many variables. We've already heard how much water, what kind of sprinkler heads, where are they located? Are they at the most useful location? What's your pump? Don't have petrol because that'll evaporate in the heat. Diesel is better. Can you turn it on when you need to? Yes, using an app. As Simon said, you're too likely to turn it on too soon when you hear there's a bushfire in your region or area, in which case you probably used up all your water before the actual fire front comes through. So yes, it's on the agenda for AS 3959, but those issues move at glacial speed.
And maybe I can imagine that sprinkler systems may have a little bit more benefit, I guess, for retrofitting to existing houses that are otherwise tricky to improve. Yes. From a bushfire point of view, Nigel.
Absolutely, because, depending which index you care to use, there's 500,000 to 1 million existing Australian homes in high or extreme bushfire BAL areas. Yeah. And of course, I went through a number of projects, a decade or more about retrofitting, and the logical absurdity is you have to knock down a perfectly livable timber house to put it up with a similar brick house. And it might be, 10, 20% safer, but do you have a spare million? It's, there are so many things you can't do. Although that said, there are so many simple devices, simple everyday things that homeowners can do that will make a difference. It's just that you can't get the complete package without a lot of work.
Simon, we've got quite a lot of viewer questions about the BAL app that you were referring to before. What's it called and who's it for exactly?
It's the Resilience Council. I think we could maybe put up the web link to it, rbcouncil.org, I believe it is. And so it's been developed firstly for bushfire, and you can put any house through it. But it's also coming out for floods as well, I believe, in the next 6 months. And there's another natural disaster that it's going to cover. I can't remember it. So, yeah, look, I think it's got, so many.
So you put in the details of your existing house or your planned house, and it gives you a bit of an assessment of, and presumably your site, your BAL rating as well, your site details.
You put, that's right. There's a number of questions. And it gives you a printable list with tick boxes at the end of it, and actually tells you what sort of environment you're in the first place. In mine, it was extreme. Mm-hmm. And as I say, the idea is that it will, or its intention is to reduce insurances by having a higher bushfire resilience.
And can be used. Is it free to use for any punter?
And it's free to use. If you want to go to the next step of having it counted towards your insurance, the idea is that you would have a bushfire consultant or someone from the out come and verify the information. That's the plan. But it's already emailed me back saying, would you like further information or someone to talk to you? So I think it's great.
So pretty straightforward to use for any homeowner who's in a bushfire zone. That's good to know. Okay. It was
a $3 or $4 million contribution from federal government in terms of, again, bushfire response from 2020, just like this BAL series is also in a smaller way.
Yeah.
Right. It's a really
I have put it out there on the grapevine to my community, and a couple of people have come back saying, I only got 1 star, which is a bit disheartening. At that point,
I imagine it would be.
I basically said, I think you might want to get a bushfire consultant to come and have a look at your house. You know, the average bushfire consultant can come out and have a look for initial look for $600 or so, and it would be well worth you getting that sort of feedback from a professional, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. I imagine that even for existing houses that can be quite tricky to retrofit, there would be low-hanging fruit that would at least improve the situation.
Yep.
Yep. One final question from our audience is about hot water systems in BAL 40 and BAL FZ zones. How do you protect them?
It depends what kind of systems you have, because if they're sitting externally, they may be metal clad, but they're going to be severely affected. If you have them enclosed, be it under the floor, inside the outside walls, it's pretty much a non-issue. But as always, the pipes and the penetrations through the wall, are they exposed or not? That becomes the bushfire issue as a result. But what do other people have to say about that?
I've never really had a certifier bring that up as a specific issue. However, we try to put the services, I guess, on the side of the building away from the main fire threat, so that at least you can try and save some of your assets.
Yeah, I guess the same. I mean, the question also applies to the external unit of reverse cycle air conditioners and, you know, anything
all
else.
Of those expensive services. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, mine is in that central courtyard, and it's facing a wall. It's about 2 meters away, so it's very well protected. But on a recent flame zone house in the Blue Mountains, we actually used a 3-phase hot water system by Stiebel, and that's inside the house, and it's only this big. It's tiny, and it's only turned on when you turn the hot water on. And so it interestingly takes it's 15 kilowatts of power when it is going, but it was taking 5 from the solar, 5 from the battery, and 5 from the grid, just when you're having a shower or using it. And
so
of course, it's inside the house. That's all protected. Yeah.
Instantaneous heat.
Yeah. It's a good solution.
As long as you've got enough power.
Yes, exactly. How about you, Sarah?
That particular house we were talking about today, the hot water unit was on the veranda that was set within the bushfire shutters, so it was already sort of within that protected perimeter anyway. But same as Ingrid and Simon, just try and strategically place them in the most, favourable area as possible. And that, would be our sort of best outcome at this stage.
Yeah. All right. I'd like to give you all an opportunity to give our audience your top takeaway on this topic, either from your experience designing the houses that you've talked about today, or just generally from your bushfire-related work and knowledge. What's something that you'd like to leave? One or two points that you'd like to leave our viewers with tonight, particularly to do with innovation.
A bit tricky.
I would say, I guess, being open to hearing about different materials and design outcomes, and being flexible with what the outcome could be, because when budget and cost and availability and bushfire all come together, the palette can sometimes get a little bit limited. So, being open to ideas of what could be out there, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great point. Simon?
Small, a smaller house can mean you've got more budget. So I think that's the way of the future, that houses will be a little bit smaller. But, with my RFS hat on, it would be, get out early and let the house just look after itself, or us look after it.
Yeah. So make it as easy as possible for the fireys to look after it for you. Is that the takeaway?
Yeah.
How about you, Ingrid?
I don't know if there's innovative, but it's probably something that I've learned over the years, is just to really simplify the shapes and the volumes, so that you don't, you really avoid those areas that embers can get lodged, because that's probably one of the main ways that these houses burn down is from the embers, and just really making simple gutter lines so that they're easy to clean out so that people don't find it a big challenge. You know, having these crazy shaped roofs that you got to spend 2 hours cleaning is not conducive to wanting to do those things. So, yeah, I'd say simplicity in the forms, but, you know, you can also have great outcomes with a simple shape, simple form. Doesn't mean that you're going to lose out on the architectural integrity of the design, but you might just save the house.
Yeah, yes.
And I say that
simple architecturally designed house that doesn't burn down is definitely more valuable than a fancier shaped one that does. What about you, Nigel?
I was just going to sum up and say all of these projects, there's 3 this evening, display exactly that. Elegant simplicity, smallness, innovation, good design, and bushfire issues were considered at the beginning, even before they actually hit the drawing board. Particularly, you could see it in Simon's initial site plan. And that's the secret. When you're dealing with high BAL, start up front with bushfire and then integrate all the other everyday considerations. You can't just sort of add a few changes of windows and doors late in the piece and expect to get a very good satisfactory home. So you've seen 3 excellent examples by excellent architect designers, and there's more to come in future weeks.
Excellent summary. Thank you very much, Nigel. Well, that's all the questions we have time for tonight. If you'd like to know more, you can view the full case studies at your leisure on our Green Rebuild Toolkit website in the Beyond BAL section. Thank you so much, Sarah, Ingrid, Simon and Nigel, of course, for sharing your time and expertise tonight. And thank you to all our attendees for tuning into this session and for all your questions. We hope that it's been valuable for you, and very sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. There are 2 more sessions in this series. Please join us next week for our dive into earth-coupled bushfire resilient design, when we'll look at 3 more case studies. 2 of them are homes that are dug into the earth, and 1 is a rammed earth home. We'll also discuss the use of dams and pools as bushfire barriers. So we'll see you then, and good night.
Great. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.